Good morning. This is Gwen Hill, Pine Ridge Baptist Church Ladies Sunday School class. Today we're studying Genesis 45. To give you just a little bit of backdrop, in chapter 44, it ended with all of the brothers, all 11 of Joseph's brothers, in Zephaniah Paneah's audience hall, and they had we had just studied how Judah made an impassioned plea to please accept him as the slave and let his brother go free. He has shown integrity, he has shown responsibility, he has shown compassion. He is thinking of his brother's safety, he is thinking of his father not grieving for another son. And he wants to take care of both. This is huge. This is the last test that Joseph had put before his brothers. They didn't know they were being tested. He put this test out just to see if these men had changed. He wanted to know that 22 years later that they would take care of their little brother, not throw him in a pit and sell him or desert him. That they were concerned about their father. They weren't concerned about him 22 years ago. But they have passed the test. Verse 1. Then Joseph could not restrain himself before all of those who stood by him, and he cried out, "Make everyone go out for me." And so no one stood with him, while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. Everyone in that room, with the exception of the 11 brothers, spoke Egyptian. When Joseph made this cry, when he demanded that all of them leave the room, he said it in Egyptian. His Hebrew brothers would not have understood what he said, and they would have been looking at one another thinking, "Oh my goodness, what's going on now?" In verse 2, and he, that's Joseph, wept aloud, and the Egyptians in the house of Pharaoh heard it. Just like today, they would have been curious when they were sent out of the room. And some, I'm sure, hung back. Probably more than likely the steward did, for definite sure. And if there were any bodyguards there, they would have. Can you see them leaning in with their hands on their daggers, maybe, in case Joseph needed something? Something big was going on, because this was out of character for Joseph. And then Joseph said to his brothers in Hebrew, big change in Hebrew, "I am Joseph. Does my father still live?" But his brothers couldn't answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. The word translated dismayed, they made that so, to me it sounds not near as strong enough, because actually what that word could be translated into is terrified. His brothers were terrified. And why wouldn't they be terrified? If this man says he's Joseph, first of all, it's like a man rising from the dead, isn't it? Because Judah had just said in the last chapter, our brother is dead. This man says he's Joseph. And if he's Joseph, we did him a great wrong. How angry is he going to be? Have you ever thought something was true and found out it wasn't? How shocked they were. Verse 4, and Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near to me." And so they came near. Can you see them looking at one another as they walk toward him? Some of them get up off the floor and come toward him. Then he says, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt." Now watch the shock on their faces. They're up close to him now. They're looking for a resemblance to the brother that they knew 22 years before. And as he sees their facial expressions, some doing recognition, some not sure, Benjamin wouldn't have known at all. Verse 5 says, "But now," Joseph is speaking, "but now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here For God sent me here before you to preserve life. Remember Jesus saying, forgive them, for they know not what they do? I don't think for a minute that it was God's plan for Joseph to be sold as a slave, for him to be thrown into prison accused of rape. I don't think any of that was. I go back to when God was talking to Satan about Job. I think what God had in mind was something else. I don't know what. But I can hear Satan say, you think he's going to be faithful? Let me show you how faithful this boy will be. And God said, you can do what you need to. Just don't kill him. Because God knew that whatever Satan put out there, God could flip it around and make it do exactly what he needed to happen. God's omnipresence and his mighty power and his sovereignty, we can see him moving all the pieces of the chessboard to make sure that his plans survive no matter what attacks Satan puts on it. Make sure it not only survived, but it flourished. In spite of man's decisions, in spite of Satan's manipulations, God could make Joseph great in the land of Canaan had he chose to. When we rebel against God, we have to go through a form of exile, don't we? And that's what happens here. Okay. In verse 6 and 7, Joseph is still speaking, and he's giving them some news that is going to sink their hearts. Listen. For these 2 years, the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. See the brothers look at one another. See them realize what dire straits they're in right now, and it's just 2 years in. What is it going to be like in 5 years? And I think they believed every word that Joseph said. This conversation is one emotional blow right after the other. And aside, how old is Joseph now? The Bible tells us he was 30 when he came out of prison and talked to Pharaoh. We've had the 7 years of plenty, and now we've had 2 years of famine. He's 39. Puts his brothers at being 45, 46, 47, right along in there. Verse 7, God sent me here before you to preserve a prosperity for you in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. You were going to die if God didn't take care of you in some shape, form, or fashion during this. So he sent me here. I'm here to keep our family alive. Why our family? Because that is the promise that God gave to our grandfather Abraham, that we would be the line for the great deliverer to come. Who's that? That's Jesus Christ. Verse 8, so now it was not you that sent me here, but God, and he has made me a father to Pharaoh, a lord of his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. He said, look where God has brought me. I'm not only an advisor to the Pharaoh himself, but he has given me, he has the power. I'm second in command here. And not just here, but the whole land of Egypt. You know, it's a prophecy that Jesus will be ruler over all the world in the last days. This is a messianic portion here. Matthew Henry says that Joseph reckoned that his advancement was not so much designed to save a whole kingdom of Egyptians as it was to preserve a small family of Israelites. For the Lord's portion is his people. Whatever becomes of others, they, Israel, shall be secured. I love Matthew Henry. If you don't study or use him as a backup, I advise you to do that. He has great insight. Verse 9, hurry. What was the very first thing that Joseph wanted to know? Dad. Is Dad still alive? Why would he be concerned about Dad? Dad's right around 130. That's why. He's an old man. He's concerned. It says, hurry and go up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all of Egypt. Now come down to me and don't tarry. So many things are running through their mind. Joseph has forgiven us. He wants to take care of us. Do we trust him? He wants us to go home and get Dad and come back here. Dad's 130. And he's not going to believe us. And if we tell him you're alive, what are we supposed to answer when he says, how did this happen? Excitement. Joseph just said they were going to get to go home. Remorse. Fear. Guilt. Joseph continues in verse 10 and 11. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near to me, you and your children, your children's children, your flocks and your herds, and all that you have. And there I will provide for you, lest you and your household and all that you have come to poverty. For there are still 5 years of famine. Joseph said, you've got to do this. We've got to preserve the family. Without you, if you don't come to Egypt, I can't guarantee your safety. I can't guarantee your survival through the 5 more years of famine. Come here. You know the land of Goshen. The land of Goshen, if you look at the tributaries in Egypt, all my fingers would be waterways. The land in between was Goshen. It was not land sturdy enough to build big temples on. It was fine for grazing it flooded often, but it was fine for grazing cattle and sheep. It was fine for doing that kind of thing. Fine for people who dwelt in tents. Fine for people who had modest homes, but not big temples like they had in Memphis and other places in Egypt where the people came to worship the Egyptian gods, little g. And in Goshen, there was not any of those temples. There was not any emphasis on them worshiping their little g gods. And that's where he wants them to go. It's a great place for raising animals. It is a great place for what he wants for his family. What he wants for his family is seclusion. He does not want them in with the rest of the Egyptians, where they would be forced by the culture to be assimilated, which means they would lose their Israeli identification as a family. So he wants them to go to an area where they can stay secluded. And he says, you got to do this. You got to get Dad. Go. I want you to hurry. Hurry, why? Hurry because there's a lot to get done before the famine gets even worse. Hurry because Dad is old. I don't want him to die before I get to see him. Hurry because I miss you all and I want family again. I have a wife. I have 2 children, but I want my family. Verse 12 and 13, 14. And behold, your eyes and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see that it's my mouth that speaks to you. He said, remember, I've got nothing against Benjamin. He was not guilty of what happened 22 years ago. Look in his eyes. I can look him straight in the eyes and tell him this, and he can believe me because I have nothing against Benjamin. You can trust me. I'll look in your eyes and I'll look in Benjamin's. Remember, in the 2 years past, he has set them up several times, and they're probably wondering, are you doing that again? And he says, no, trust me. Trust me. And do you think I look like Benjamin? We've got the same mom and daddy. He says, tell Daddy everything and hurry and bring him back here. It's my mouth that speaks to you. I'm telling you true. It's your brother. You can believe me and you can trust me. In verse 13, so you tell my father of all my glory in Egypt and all that you have seen, and you shall hurry and bring my father down here. And then he fell on his brother Benjamin's neck, and he wept. And Benjamin wept on his neck. The other 10 brothers stood there for just a second and watched and wondered. And the release of emotion as he held the brother that he has wanted to hold for 22 years. Genesis 45, 15 through 18. Moreover, he kissed all his brothers, and he wept over them. Can you imagine? I have 2 brothers. And if we've just been gone for a few days away from each other, I want to hug their neck, tell them I miss them. I can't imagine what it'd be like after 22 years. He cried. Have you ever cried because somebody was in your presence that you hadn't seen in a long time, and it made you feel so good inside to see them? And he wept over them. And notice the last phrase. That turned the brothers' tongues loose, and they began to talk. So much had passed in 22 years. As much as they wanted to know everything that had happened to Joseph, Joseph wanted to know, how was the family? Judah, do you have children? Simon, do you have children? Are you married? Naphtali? How many nieces and nephews do I have? What about our sister Diana? What's going on with her life? Update me on the family. So he's talking with them. He has a lot to say. They have a lot to say. You know, after a kiss, we feel free to talk sometimes too, don't we? In verse 16, now the report of it was heard in Pharaoh's house, saying, Joseph's brothers have come. And it pleased Pharaoh and his servants as well. As soon as those listening servants understood that these men were Joseph's brothers, somebody hurried to tell Pharaoh's servants, and then they in turn hurried to tell Joseph. You know, they loved Joseph. He had saved their lives. He had made them very affluent. He has been a very great asset. And anything that makes Joseph happy, they would be thrilled about. So in verse 17 and 18, Pharaoh says to Joseph, say to your brothers, do this, load your animals and depart and go to the land of Canaan. Bring your father and your households and come to me. I will give you the best in the land of Egypt, and you will eat the fat of the land. All right. He tells him, he said, load up their donkeys with all that they can carry. Give him some carts so that they can load everything up for the trip over here. And I want them to come be with us. In verse 19, he says, Pharaoh's still talking to Joseph, and he says, now you are commanded to do this. Take carts out of the land of Egypt for your little ones and your wives, and bring your father and come. And also do not be concerned about your goods, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. Well, he's a politician. Let's look at the rest of it. Then the sons of Israel did so, and Joseph gave them the carts according to the command of Pharaoh, and he gave them provisions for the journey. The 11 sons are making ready to hurry home to their fathers. And notice all of this promising that the Pharaoh did. He said, Joseph, bring all of your family here and let them set up household here. They don't need to bring anything but their own selves. Leave everything else at where they're at now, and they will have all brand new stuff here. I'll provide for them. After all that you've done for me, this is what I can do for you. Verses 22 through 23, Joseph gave to all of them, to each man, changes of garments. But to Benjamin, he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of garments. And he sent to his father these things, 10 donkeys loaded with the good things of Egypt, 10 female donkeys loaded with grain, bread, and food for his father for the journey. Joseph is making sure that his father understands that he now is very wealthy, that he now can take care of his family, that they're safe to come to Egypt because they have not only the Pharaoh's blessing, but their son, his son, Jacob's son, is in a position to care for his family. He noticed he gave them changes of garments. They need to look the part. Joseph is the second in command. His family needs to look the part. So he's sending him clothing. And for Benjamin, he sends him with money. And the brothers could care less. The brothers are happy. They're thankful for what Joseph has blessed them with. Verse 24, so he sent his brothers away, and they departed. And he said to them, see that you do not become troubled along the way. Joseph is a very wise man. God has given him a lot of insight. And what he is seeing in human nature is that they would play the blame game on the way home. That there would be a lot of things that they would feel guilty over. There would be a lot of things that they would wonder how it would be different. 22 years is a long time to hold that much guilt in, and it's human nature, if I'm guilty of something, to try to share that guilt with someone else. Well, I wouldn't have done that if you hadn't have done this. And he knows that, and he doesn't want them to quarrel. He wants them to have peace. He wants them to go home and get Dad. Matthew Henry shared that this change, this charge our Lord Jesus has given us, that we love one another and that we live in peace, and that whatever occurs or whatever former occurrences are remembered, that we fall not out. He wants, we'll be known, how we'll know we are his. How? By the way we love one another. And that's what Joseph is trying to tell his brothers. We are brethren. We all have the same Father. In the same way, we still have the same Father, Jesus. He has given us oneship with the Father. And we are his brethren. We are his brethren, and we shame our relationship to him, who is our peace, if we're angry with one another, if we fall out with one another. We are guilty, very guilty, and instead of quarreling with one another, have a great deal of reason to fall out with ourselves. Look at who is instrumental. Don't blame it on other people. We are hope to be forgiven by God, whom we have offended. All of us have offended. Therefore, we should be ready to forgive one another. Others are watching. Love one another as you walk and as you live the way. You notice he used the word the way up here? I thought that was intriguing. Verses 25 through 28. Then they went up out of Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to Jacob their father. Can you see Benjamin running ahead and said, hurry up. We don't need to rest yet. We've got things to do. We need to go see Dad. Verse 26, and they told him, saying, Joseph is still alive, and he is governor over all the land of Egypt. Remember how shocked they were? Well, they're just blurting it right on out to Jacob. And it says, and Jacob's heart stood still because he did not believe them. Bam, your favorite son is alive. And bam, he is a power. He has much power. He is the second in command of the superpower of their time. Verse 27, but when they told him all the words which Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob their father revived. Then Israel said, it's enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. He's listening to these boys, these sons of his, these men, telling him that his favorite son is really still alive. And not only alive, but he's prospering. And as he just can't quite wrap his mind around that, he hears the shouts of the drivers, the rumble of the carts, the baying of the animals as they come forth, as he begins to see them come over the little hill into where they're at. It's bearing out the truth of what his sons are saying. Hope begins to blossom in his heart. And he's revived. The spirit is revived. He begins, do you see the tears running down his face? Then Israel said, it is enough. Don't tell me anymore. I'm not going to ask any questions, and I don't want you to tell me anymore. It's enough that Joseph is alive. The thing I'm the most concerned about is that Joseph is alive. And he said, I want to go. I want to go see him before I die. Joseph says, I'm an old man. I don't want to be exposed to any more emotional upheavals. I've had enough to wrap my heart and my mind about. All I want to know right now is to be assured that little Joey is alive, that Joseph is alive. Everything else paled by comparison. Next week we go to Genesis 46 and watch what Jacob does. Jacob has had a hard rap. You know, Jacob's a really smart dude, and he is within the will of the Lord, and he's doing what he needs to do. Let's watch him next week. Have a really good day, really good week. See you later.